So, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So, in this video, we are going to discuss about cardiovascular systems and particularly how your parasympathetic and sympathetic system is controlling our cardiovascular systems, right. So, there are two systems under your ANS. If you talk about just an overview about your nervous system, so there is a brain, right. For example, this is your brain, this is your spinal cord. So brain and spinal cord make a system that we call CNS, that is your central nervous systems, right. The nerves which are originated from the brain we call cranial nerves, and the nerves which are originated from the spinal cord we call spinal nerves. So there are 31 pairs of the spinal nerves and 12 pairs of your cranial nerves, right. So the nerves which are originated from the brain and the spinal cord, that makes another systems. One system is your CNS, that we call central nervous systems. So the nerves which are originated from the brain, that we call cranial nerves, and nerves which are originated from the spinal cord we call spinal nerves. So this makes another system, and that system we call PNS. PNS, that we call peripheral nervous systems. Peripheral nervous systems, right. So that will be called PNS. And if you see the classification of PNS, so further PNS is classified into three types. So first is CNS. CNS, your brain and spinal cord makes your central nervous systems, and the nerves which are originated from the brain we call cranial nerves. Nerves which are originated from the spinal cord we call spinal nerves. So there is a 31 pair of spinal nerves, there are 12 pairs of your cranial nerves. So these nerves which are originated from the brain and spinal cords makes one system that we call PNS. PNS is your peripheral nervous system. So this peripheral nervous system is further divided into three types, right. So peripheral nervous systems, when we talk about PNS, that is your peripheral nervous systems, that is of three types. One is your ENS, ANS, SNS. What are these? This is your peripheral nervous systems. ENS is enteric nervous systems. Enteric nervous systems. This one is your autonomic nervous systems, and this one is your somatic nervous systems, right. So this is your parts of your peripheral nervous system. And peripheral nervous systems, the nerves which are originated from the brain and spinal cord, that makes these systems. So ENS is the enteric nervous systems, which is related to your gastrointestinal tract, GIT systems, right. Somatic nervous systems deals with your skeletal muscles, and your autonomic nervous system, which we are going to discuss how our sympathetic and parasympathetic system is controlling the cardiovascular system. So this ANS is further divided into two parts, that is your parasympathetic nervous systems and sympathetic nervous systems. So we are going to discuss how this ANS, that is your sympathetic and parasympathetic system, is controlling our cardiovascular system, particularly how it can control your heart, how it control our blood vessels. So how autonomic nervous systems, that is autonomic nervous system is made up of two, sympathetic and parasympathetic, right. So how this is controlling our blood cardiovascular systems. So first you have to understand parasympathetic, about the parasympathetic nervous systems. Parasympathetic nervous systems. So parasympathetic nervous systems, you know, the major neurotransmitters in the postganglionic fibers, right. on the basis of preganglionic fibers always contains chemical that is the acetylcholine. So you can't differentiate between parasympathetic and sympathetic systems based on the uh, chemical which is present in the preganglionic fibers, right. The chemical which is present in the postganglionic fibers you can differentiate there on the basis of the chemical, but you can't differentiate in the preganglionic fibers, because reason is because this is your brain, spinal cord, for example your preganglionic fibers or preganglionic neurons, then this is your postganglionic, then there is a target organs, right. So these neurons, these vesicles which contains the chemicals, so chemicals are always the acetylcholine in preganglionic fibers. That's why I am saying on the basis of chemical you can't differentiate at this stage between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So how you can differentiate? You can differentiate based on the origins, your craniosacral outflow and dorsolumbar outflow. So one is making your sympathetic system, another one is making your parasympathetic systems. So but based on chemical you can't differentiate, because all the vesicles which is all the vesicles of the preganglionic fibers contains the chemical, that chemical is acetylcholine. So of course the acetylcholine, whenever there are any signals, this vesicle is diffused with the membrane, this chemical will come out and reach in the synaptic cleft, and here is the receptors for that chemical. So receptors for acetylcholine is here is NN, nicotinic receptors, and receptor name is NN, that is the nicotinic receptor which are present in autonomic ganglia. So you know acetylcholine have a two types of receptor all over the body, muscarinic and nicotinic. Nicotinic is further divided into two parts, NN and NM. NM is present on neuromuscular junction, NN is present on autonomic ganglia. So further this postganglionic fibers, if it contains again acetylcholine, then it's a parasympathetic system, but if it contains adrenaline, non-adrenaline, then it make your sympathetic systems. So here based on the chemical you can differentiate between these two systems. There is another differentiation is the length of the fibers. Preganglionic fiber length and postganglionic fiber length is different in parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. So I am not going in that details, because our major objective is how parasympathetic and sympathetic system is controlling our cardiovascular system. But that is your particularly sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, and how it controlling your your cardiovascular systems, your heart. So parasympathetic system, as I said, the major neurotransmitters which is present in the parasympathetic system is your acetylcholine. So I hope you all knows, many times we have discussed acetylcholine, how it synthesizes in the neurons. It's biosynthesized in the neurons. So there is a channels in the neuron that takes the choline, and choline from where you are getting? From your food. From food it's breakdown in the gastrointestinal tract and then absorbed in the systemic circulation. Then there is a choline channel which will do the uptake of choline. Choline will reach inside, then there is a acetyl coenzyme A which you are getting from the mitochondria, and it forms the chemical that is acetylcholine. So choline is combining with the acetyl coenzyme A and makes the one chemical that name is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a major neurotransmitter. What are neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters are the chemicals which are present in the neuron and help in the transmission of signals from one neuron to another. So acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter which is stored inside the vesicles. So whenever there is any action potential will be changed. So you know there is a movement of ions, particularly cations, like sodium channel will open, your action potential will goes towards positive sides, because your resting membrane potential is in negative, right. So when your positive ions opens, your action potential will goes towards positive sides, and your vesicles will be diffused with the membrane, and the chemical which is stored inside the vesicle which will be come out, right, it will be come out, and chemical is here is the acetylcholine. And I told you all over the body acetylcholine have a two types of receptors, and receptors are muscarinic receptors and nicotinic receptors, that we call M and N. Muscarinic receptors and nicotinic. Muscarinic and nicotinic. So these muscarinic receptors are further categorized into M1, M2, M3. There are M4, M5 as well has been identified, but their role is not yet established. And nicotinic receptors are further categorized into two types, NN and NM. These are the receptors of the acetylcholine, which is the major neurotransmitters of parasympathetic system. So now you have to know the next thing. What you have to know is what are the location of these receptors, because these are present all over the body. So M1 receptor is mainly present on gastria. M2 is on your heart. So we are going this part, heart, right? M3 is on your smooth muscles. NN is on your autonomic ganglia. NM is on your neuromuscular junctions, right? And another thing which is important to remember is, I told you there are 4 types of receptors, right? One is your, if you remember, there is a GPCR, G protein coupled receptors. There is a ligand gated ion channel receptors, ligand gated ion channel receptors. There is a enzyme linked kinase receptors, enzyme linked kinase receptors, and there is a nuclear receptor. So these are the 4 types of the receptors, right? So whenever we are talking about the receptor, next thing which should comes in your mind is which family it belongs. So muscarinic receptors belongs to your GPCR. So all muscarinic receptors are GPCR, and nicotinic receptors are your ligand gated ion channel receptors, right? So depending upon their, again I am repeating, acetylcholine have muscarinic and nicotinic receptors. Muscarinic is M1, M2, M3. Nicotinic is NN and NM. So next is these all muscarinic receptors are GPCR, and all nicotinic receptors are your ligand gated ion channel receptors. Ligand gated ion channel receptors. So now if question is asked, means 10 marks question, 5 marks, so you have to write the detail about. So whenever the receptor which is GPCR, so you should remember what is the configuration of GPCR. We have discussed many times. So that is your cell membrane receptors. So there is a one domain is outside the cells, that we call extracellular domain, where ligand is going to bind, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 times it crossed the membrane. So we also called it 7 transmembrane receptors. It looks like a snake. We also called it serpentine receptors. So there is a extracellular domain outside the cells, and inside the cell there is a intracellular domain. So extracellular domain, here ligand is going to bind, and ligand in this case is acetylcholine, right? So acetylcholine will bind, and depending upon intracellular domain, there is a GS, GQ, GI, isoform of G proteins. Your intracellular signalings will be going to activate, and depending upon that you will get the response. If your ligand is going to activate GS or GQ, then there is always a contractions, always, whether it is whatever your target organ is, it will do the contraction. If we are talking about the heart, so in the heart your receptors which is present is M2 receptors, right? And if your ligand is going to activate this GI is inhibitory in nature, it is going to decrease, so it is going to slow down the heart. So now question is, this M2 receptors, all these M1, M2, M3 all are GPCR, but this M2 receptor is going to activate when your acetylcholine on the heart act on M2 receptors, which form in the intracellular domain it's going to activate. So it's going to this one GI, and GI is inhibitory in nature. It will inhibit the actions of adenyl cyclase. If your adenyl cyclase action is inhibited, so there is a decrease in the formation of CMP. If your cyclic adenine monophosphates is decreased, your phosphorylation of calcium channel is going to decrease. If your calcium channel phosphorylation is decreased, less influx of calcium channels, calcium ions. So less influx of calcium ion, less contraction. So what does it mean? When your acetylcholine is acting on the heart, it's going to slow down your heart. So you will find it could result in bradycardia. Bradycardia. So what is the effect of acetylcholine on the heart? Bradycardia. How acetylcholine result in bradycardia? Answer to this question is, this is the mechanism. You have to be so, this is acetylcholine binding in the M2 receptor. M2 receptor is on the heart and it's going to GI is inhibitory, it's going to inhibit the process and it will result in bradycardia. So now question is, which type of bradycardia? So particularly this is going to result in sinus bradycardia. Why? Why you are getting the sinus bradycardia? Answer to this question is, if you see the heart, there is M2 receptors, but M2 receptors on the heart is particularly on the SA nodes and AV node, not all over the heart. So it's going to slow down this. So if it's going to slow down, so you will get the sinus bradycardia. So what I mean to say, what is the, if question is asked, what is the effect of parasympathetic system on heart? So answer to this question is, it result bradycardia. The question is how it result in bradycardia. So this is a mechanism. You have to be so, there are a acetylcholine is released, acetylcholine receptor is M2, M2 receptor belongs to GPCR, GPCR configuration is this, it's going to GI, it's inhibit the adenyl cyclases, decrease in CMP will inhibit the phosphorylations of your calcium channel. Calcium channel, if not phosphorylated, less influx of calcium from outside to inside, less movement of calcium from outside to inside, there is a contractions will be going to be decreased. So it's going to depress your heart. So parasympathetic system always going to depress your heart. And another thing which is important to remember is, these all M2, M1, M2 all are GPCR. But as I said, depending upon which isoform it's going to be activate in intracellular domain, your actions will be different. So if we talk about M1 receptor which is present on gastria, so M1 receptor, when your acetyl, same chemical which is acting on M1 receptor, same family it belongs. M1 receptor is also GPCR, but it's going to do the stimulations. Your gastric secretion is going to increase. So how it's going to increase? Because when your acetylcholine act on M1 receptor on gastria, it's going to activate your GS or GQ isoform, these isoforms, GQ isoform. So it will increase the secretions of the gastric. It will do the secretions of HCl from the parietal cells, right? So that's why we parasympathetic system we also call rest and digest system. डाइजेस्ट कब होगा? जब आपका हाइड्रोक्लोरिक एसिड स्टमक में बनेगा, वही हेल्प करेगा डाइजेशन में. दैट्स व्हाई वी कॉल्ड इट रेस्ट एंड डाइजेस्ट. जब आप रेस्ट कर रहे हो तो आपकी हार्ट रेट कोई इंक्रीज हो रही है क्या? टैकीकार्डिया हो रहा है क्या? आप सो रहे हो तो योर हार्ट रेट इज गोइंग टू स्लो डाउन. सो दैट इज ब्रैडीकार्डिया बिकॉज योर पैरासिम्पैथेटिक सिस्टम इज प्रीडोमिनेट ओवर सिंपैथेटिक सिस्टम. जब आपको गुस्सा आ रहा है, एंजाइटी है, इन दैट केस योर सिंपैथेटिक सिस्टम प्रीडोमिनेट ओवर द पैरासिम्पैथेटिक सिस्टम. Right, so this is the how parasympathetic, what is the action of parasympathetic systems on heart, right? Now next thing is, what is the action of sympathetic systems on the heart? Sympathetic systems major neurotransmitters are your adrenaline, non-adrenaline. And I think we have discussed in earlier video how these adrenaline, non-adrenaline are synthesized. If you remember, I told you there is a CH2CH, NH2COH, that is your alanine. Alanines, there is a attachment of phenyl, that will become phenylalanine. Then there is a OH, then it become tyrosine. Then one or more hydroxyl group, it become DOPA. DOPA is dihydroxyphenylalanine. Then this dihydroxyphenylalanine will convert into dopamine. How it converts? This carboxylic group will be removed, so it will become dopamine. Then there is a non-adrenaline, then there is a adrenaline. So this is biosynthesis. I am not going in detail because we already covered it in earlier video when we talk about cardiovascular pharmacology, how these are biosynthesized. So this adrenaline, non-adrenaline is have a receptors all over the body, and receptors are alpha and beta receptors. And alpha receptors are further categorized into alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. These are the different types. Now next question, as I said, next question which should come in your mind is which category of receptor these receptor belongs. So answer to this question is these all receptor belongs to GPCR. This one is also GPCR. These ones are also GPCR. Right? Now their locations. Next is locations. Alpha 1 receptor is present on your small blood vessels. So all small blood vessels have your alpha 1 receptors, small blood vessels. Alpha 2 receptors are present on presynaptic membrane. Presynaptic. So that's why it acts as a brake to the sympathetic systems. Presynaptic. Beta 1 is present on your heart. Beta 1 receptor is present on heart. Beta 2 is on smooth muscles like bronchi, right? Beta 3 is on adipose tissues. So these are their locations. So what are locations? Alpha 1 is present on small blood vessels. Alpha 2 is present on presynaptic membranes. Beta 1 is present on heart. Beta 2 is present on smooth muscle. Beta 3 is present on adipose tissues. So now depending, and all these receptors alpha and beta both belongs to GPCR. So what is the effect of sympathetic systems on cardiovascular system? On cardiovascular system, particularly on heart, which receptor are present? Beta 1, right?